This might be one of the scariest ways your food ages you. And yes, surprise, despite being absolutely critical for life and our potential vitality, it can kind of do the opposite too. And to be fair, it's not just your food. It's a combination of a number of lifestyle variables. But food and the way we consume it is a big one. And that scary part is the way in which this takes place inside of us. Completely silent, accelerating metabolic disease and cellular aging until, well, it's too obvious to ignore. Oh, and if you thought your 5-pound mushy membrane was safe up there protected by the blood-brain barrier, this new study we're going to review today has got some news for you. Let's go. Yo, yo, yo. What is up? Welcome back to another week of How to Health. My name is Kevin. I run liftingbalance.com, where we take aim at all things health and longevity and do it in an odd, weird, interesting, and highly sarcastic way. Today, if you haven't already made the connection from my sly yet informative clues, at least I thought so, we are talking about the silent disease taking the Western world by storm, type 2 diabetes, specifically focusing in on how it may affect the age of our all-important, non-renewing 5-pound mushy membrane, the brain, which, as you can imagine, is not a helpful happening for our health and longevity endeavors. So before we get to that study, it's worth taking a minute to talk about how this condition comes about and stirs its nefarious metabolic stew. Probably not the best analogy, but let's keep moving. And to do this, I'd like to bring forth the number 88. Why, you ask? Because it's estimated that nearly 88% of the US adult population is dealing with some sort of metabolic dysfunction. In other words, only 12% of the adult population is estimated to be metabolically healthy, which is pretty damn wild when you think about it. Here's the kicker. Most people don't even know this dysfunction is taking place. In other words, it's silent, unless they are proactively looking for it in the form of metabolic screenings. And one of the most common first steps in this quiet dysfunction typically is prediabetes, which, under the hood, is a silent metabolic situation where key tissue types like the liver hepatocytes and skeletal muscle myocytes become desensitized to the energy-regulating hormone insulin, the hormone which acts as the key to opening up the cellular doors for glucose uptake. And after I remind you that glucose is the body's preferred energy source, with a certain amount needed in your body and cells at all times to survive, you can see where this may become a little bit of an issue. An issue which modern science has displayed is very much driven by lifestyle, as the onset of this disease, although sneaking younger and younger each year, becomes much more prevalent after the first few decades of life, and interestingly is ever so suspiciously correlated with the modern societal norms of 24/7 ultra-processed eating, extreme sedentary behavior, chronically deprived disaligned sleep, and excess stress galore. Funny connection, right? And eventually, when this situation is chronic, it turns into the full-fledged disease of type 2 diabetes. And if you were wondering how these everyday norms can somehow translate into metabolic dysfunction like this, let's explore a hypothetical yet probably common example. Say you eat a modern Western diet, enriched in energy-dense, nutrient-scarce foods, otherwise known as ultra-processed foods, and you follow the common practice of consuming energy within the first 30 minutes of getting up until the last 30 minutes before bed. Chronically following habits like this over the course of years will likely create an internal environment of chronically elevated blood sugar, and as a byproduct of this, chronically higher insulin, as this is the hormone secreted every single time we eat with the sole mission of clearing glucose from the bloodstream. Pretty straightforward so far, right? Good. Because here's where the funny business begins. First, inside the cell. These chronically elevated levels of intracellular glucose can damage our critical energy-producing mitochondria, leading them to become less efficient and less flexible, and in turn, increase the secretion of damaging free radicals. And as this damage accumulates, it begins to set off the cellular alarms, triggering the immune system to respond to the area. A response which can often leave surrounding healthy cells in harm's way. This, what I just described, is the beginnings of chronic inflammation, which, as we've mentioned in basically every other video on this channel, is longevity liability numero uno. Now, there's only so much glucose that can get absorbed at a time. And when the body runs out of places to store this glucose, it goes to option 2 and begins to convert it to fat in the liver. And if this fat cannot be exported to long-term storage fast enough, it begins to accumulate in the midsection, more specifically in and around the organs of the midsection. This is known as visceral fat. And guess what? It's highly inflammatory. Now, as this continues to happen day in and day out, key metabolic organs become more and more damaged and worn out, including the insulin-producing beta cells of the pancreas, sometimes to the point where they begin to just straight up shut down. All this while those damaged cells become less sensitive to the signal of insulin. As a result, continuing to increase average blood glucose to now damaging levels. But this dysfunction doesn't stop there. Often, it leads to hormone imbalances, specifically in this case with the hunger hormone ghrelin and satiety hormone leptin, leading to something called leptin resistance, where the brain does not receive the satiety signal, ultimately creating the biochemical illusion of hunger, when in fact the cells are fully nourished. So, more poor eating ensues, a vicious cycle indeed. Compound this over the span of years to decades, and it's no wonder an estimated 88% of the US population is metabolically unhealthy. Now, of course, this was a highly simplified sample example, but hopefully you're seeing the point. Long story short, we want to get ahead of this dysfunction before it manifests into a cellular and metabolic shit show that drastically increases our odds, likelihood, and probability of developing one of the major age-related diseases before our 10th decade of life. And if you weren't convinced after that, this new hot off the scientific streets research may do the trick. Let's take a look. Researchers from the Karolinska Institute sought to see how pre-diabetes and type 2 diabetes influence the aging of everyone's favorite 5-pound mushy membrane. To do this, they tapped into data collected on over 31,000 middle-aged adults from the UK Biobank, analyzing brain MRI scans, cardiometabolic risk factors including obesity, hypertension, low HDL cholesterol, and high triglycerides, as well as lifestyle behaviors including smoking, drinking, and physical activity, to investigate the potential connection, and to ascertain if the participants were metabolically healthy, pre-diabetic, or full-blown type 2 diabetic at baseline. They used the scientific standard of hemoglobin A1C, which is essentially the 3-month running average of blood glucose within the body. And when it came to the actual analysis, they used a machine learning approach, compiling all the aforementioned variables as data points to estimate participants' brain age in relation to their chronological age. Throughout the process, looking for any noticeable correlations between it and the diabetes-induced metabolic dysfunction. Pretty cool, right? So, what'd they find? Well, first off, that there was indeed a connection. Observing that prediabetes and type 2 diabetes were both associated with a significantly higher brain aging, and that full type 2 diabetes was further associated with a significant increase in brain aging over time. Pretty interesting. What else? They also noted that the association was more pronounced in people with 2 or more cardiometabolic risk factors, in particular men. But guess what? When they factored in lifestyle components, they found something amazing. that living a healthier lifestyle significantly attenuated the Diabetes Brain Aging Association. You don't say. Now, this retrospective analysis certainly does not come with enough rigor to suggest that these are the exact multiples by which diabetes ages one's brain faster. But it certainly begins to open one's eyes, if they're not open already, to the potential impact. Which begs the next question: how and why would diabetes drive this brain aging? And is there anything we could do about it? Well, to tackle that first one, first, as you can imagine, there are quite a bunch of potential mechanisms at play. First, we have the aforereviewed metabolic factors, as hyperglycemia or chronically elevated blood glucose can lead to glucose toxicity, damaging brain cells and impairing their function, while insulin resistance can impair glucose-hungry neurons of their fix, and mitochondria dysfunction can lead to reduced energy supply in the brain, as well as an uptick in free radical secretion. Not cool, but there's more. As a byproduct of non-brain cellular dysfunction, diabetes can also impact the flow of compounds in and out of the brain. This can be due to its association with atherosclerosis, a condition where plaque builds up in the arteries, leading to reduced blood flow to the brain and thus delivery of nutrients like glucose, or its impact on the integrity of the all-important blood-brain barrier, making it more permeable and allowing harmful substances that aren't supposed to get up there to enter the brain. Yikes is right. And all of this collectively leads to the increase of longevity liability, numero uno, you know what it is by now, chronic inflammation, which brings nothing but downside and damage to the brain. Thus, as a cumulative outcome, accelerates its aging. Now, again, these are oversimplified examples. In reality, these happenings are all very complex, multifaceted problems, which do not happen solely as a byproduct of diabetes. That being said, insulin resistance and the problems that it brings with it is often an early significant part of the dysfunction equation. Which leads us to that next question. Can we reverse it? Or better yet, avoid it altogether? And that's where I think we're going to start, because the ideal scenario is not getting in the compromised situation in the first place, right? The situation that 88% of the US population is stumbling into because they likely became complacent with the well-being of their pretty cool meat suit. And I've found that the best way to do this prevention thing is by paying more attention to what I like to call the foundational components of health and longevity, or the core lifestyle variables that put your pretty cool meat suit in a position to operate efficiently and do it for the long run. We're talking about prioritizing real, whole, nourishing foods, high quality circadian aligned sleep, staying active or moving that badonkadonk in an intentional and methodical way on the reg, and getting out and about in the environment we've evolved in for millions of primate years and have deep biological ties to. Now, that being said, many modern day people will unfortunately find themselves in the camp of, how do I reverse this shit? Which, as I alluded to before, there are some potential methods. But I do want to point out, with every disease and condition, there happens to be some sort of dysfunctional point of no return, meaning a point where the damage has gotten so bad that there's no full recovery. And with type 2 diabetes, this seems to be when the pancreatic beta cells dwindle out because of all the stress. However, this is typically an advanced stage of the disease, a stage that normally takes a few decades to get to. So when we talk about options, and pushing pharmaceuticals aside, because those really just manage the situation rather than fix it, the most successful approach thus far to reverse this metabolic disorder has been a low carbohydrate diet, or limiting the amount of glucose consumed and training the body to become more metabolically flexible, leveraging fat as fuel instead. And a way to supercharge this reverso would be adding exercise into the equation as well. And I'll tell you why. Skeletal muscle cells are one of the main sinks for glucose in the body. They absorb it and either use it or store it as glycogen. So the more muscle one has, the better they will likely be able to manage blood sugar. Thus why exercising and consuming adequate amounts of protein to build muscle, as we discussed in this video here, are two of the best things you can do for your metabolic health. There is also a growing promise being displayed in daily time-restricted feeding and intermittent fasting, as research like this study we reviewed here has shown that following a 12-hour calorie restriction for 5 days followed by 10 days of ad libitum eating, and doing this for 6 cycles over the course of 3 months, actually reversed many participants' type 2 diabetes diagnosis and kept many in remission the months following the study. Pretty freaking cool, right? Finally, I gotta add that any reversal attempts will become exponentially more difficult if you are not prioritizing high-quality circadian aligned sleep, as chronic disaligned deprived sleep has repeatedly shown to be metabolically impairing and craving inducing, especially with those pesky ultra-processed foods. So keep your eyes open while prioritizing sleep. Make sense? Good. As always, the action lies with the individual. We have this unbelievable gift of being able to deploy intentional change and alter our outcome. A gift that many of us intelligent walking apes are not leveraging to its true power when it comes to the health and well-being of our most valuable asset. So don't be that person. Be the rebel in the herd, the healthy one, and own that shit. A decision, might I add, your future brain will thank you for. And your present one too.